Hey there, this is Pete Erickson. I'm with Modev. You're just joining us for the Context is Everything Hackathon kickoff. So we're going to be with you in just a moment. We're going to let a few more folks dial in here. And be sure, if you've got questions, to please use the Q&A feature that's on the bottom toolbar there. So you can ask any questions, and we'll either be able to answer them in real time, or we'll make sure that we get back to you. I have to tell you, one of the most enjoyable things I've ever been a part of are hackathons. When I started Modev, the very first conference we put on all the way back in 2010 had a hackathon. And it was a life changer for a lot of people that were there. This was all about mobile technology. Things were emerging quickly, but it was an eye opener. And the reason it was an eye opener is that a lot of people came to the event that weren't even well-seasoned developers, but the hackathon became their launch pad into development. I've watched careers grow since then at every hackathon that I've been a part of. And hackathons play a critical role in the economy because it's where ideas get sparked, right? And you know, it's so fun to be able to take a SDKs, a set of APIs, and look at things through a different lens and try to solve problems. And in today's world, in this, you know, coming together of so many kinds of platforms, conversational AI, mobile, web, and social, there's just this amazing opportunity to move the ball forward in a number of different ways. I'm really looking forward to seeing all the ideas from this hackathon and what comes to life. And I want to encourage everybody that's a part of this hackathon to take advantage of the resources that are at your fingertips. I mean, this is an opportunity to work with experts on these platforms, both Symbol and Vonage, for almost the next 30 days and move your ideas forward. So hackathons are just a wonderful opportunity. I've enjoyed them throughout my career here at Modev. And the Context is Everything hackathon is no different. I'm really excited. And I want to thank Symbol and Vonage for being our hackathon sponsors this year at Voice 22. Just a real quick piece of trivia information about Voice. Many of you may not know this, but Voice was born out of a nationwide hackathon we put on called Voice Hacks. We went out across the country in 2017. We went to 10 cities. We learned so much about the market that it allowed us to actually launch a voice conference called Voice Summit in 2018 in Newark, New Jersey. So this conference is now in its 5th year. We're excited because we can come back together as human beings and reconnect. But for this hackathon, you don't even have to do that. You can participate virtually. And with that said, I'm excited to turn this over to our hosts. And I guess first up will be David Von Thienen with Symbol, and then we'll have Chris from Vonage take you through the hackathon and everything you need to know to get started. And guys, thank you so much again for hosting. I will turn it over to you now, David.
Yeah, thanks for the warm welcome. It's actually very interesting for me because it's going to be my first voice. So it's actually really great to hear the history, like how the conference and everything got started. So yeah, welcome everyone to the Voice 2022 hackathon. So I'm really excited for this for the exact same reasons echoed by Peter there. Hackathons are great ways to immerse yourself in technology, and yeah, let's just kick it right off. So I'm going to introduce myself. My name is David Von Thienen. I'm a developer advocate at Symbol. I'm now a conversation engineer, so kind of like how I like to coin it. In prior lives, I used to deal in Kubernetes virtualization environments like VMware and doing all sorts of stuff in the cloud, whether it's AWS, GCP, and Azure. And I'll turn it over to Chris for his intro.
Hi, my name is Chris Tankersley. I'm a developer advocate for integrations at Vonage. So I've been dealing with the API space for many years now, both through our work at Vonage through the Open API consortium, as well as just other things around APIs. Primarily programming PHP, but do a lot of TypeScript and Python as well. So I tend to deal with a lot of the developer experience stuff that we do at Vonage itself.
Cool, awesome. So let's look at the agenda today. Like obviously, most importantly, we're going to take a look at the hackathon and like what the what we're expecting, like the overview of it, and give you some ideas for some sample example applications. And then, of course, why we're all here for a hackathon, not only to learn, but there's also some very cool prizes that we're going to give away. So we'll go over that. Then we'll kind of summarize the hackathon and kind of like tie everything in together, and then go into overviews for both Vonage and Symbol. And then towards the end, we'll make some resources available for everyone so that they have other means to like either contact us or look over some documentation. And then we'll open up to Q&A at the end. So the hackathon. So the details, you can find all of the details outlined on the hackathon landing page right there. So the link's right there on the voicesummit.ai website there. Kind of I wanted to give and frame the hackathon in a way that's kind of like really relevant to like what's going around today. So, you know, we went through this thing called COVID. You know, the pandemic kind of really shifted the way we deal with meetings and talking with other people and how we interact and converse with others. Since obviously we had to do a lot of the stuff, you know, from home, it pushed everything online. And using different platforms for, you know, doing meetings, just like what we're doing today, where we couldn't do them in person, and we kind of needed to have this huge push to do it online and digitally. Since then, there have been other, you know, video providers who do meetings and whatnot. Vonage is a great, you know, platform that also has that capability. And it's very interesting that a lot of the data that's coming back out on the other side of the pandemic, we find that there's been an 83.13% of participants in meetings, right? Like whether it's Zoom, using Vonage, it's about 12 or less hours per week spent per person, like, you know, doing the corporate, you know, meetings, whether it's, you know, having meetings to just talk with other family members, whether it's in a corporate situation. It's a pretty large amount of time spent per week, especially when you're thinking about like a work week, 12 hours per or less, and it's about 83.13% of us. Now, if you kind of distill that down a little bit, if you take a look at people who've spent 4 to 12 hours a week in meetings, that's about 36.89%, which is roughly about 1/3 of us spend roughly between 10% or 30% of our work week in meetings in some form of digital, like video conference type style meetings. So why is that really kind of important? It's important because when we have meetings in person, we can take notes. We can even like have like a recording, you know, have people like taking meeting minutes. But when we moved to this digital format where we're having these meetings, a lot of times we record them, which is great, so we can go back and look at them later. But in reality, a lot of people don't go back and look at those recorded meetings when they've missed them. And kind of the idea is, if we can take the conversation out of these digital formats like video, like voice, like over like telephone, like cell phones, or even like just email and text messages, and we have the ability to pull that conversation out of those formats and those mediums, it allows us to make, you know, it gives us the ability to understand like what those conversations are about and how we can tie them back to our everyday lives in the real world. And so that's kind of like putting those dots close enough together. Say if I have a meeting and we're talking about something in Jira, there would be a cool way if we could like flag that and say in the real world, hey, I got an email because I mentioned Jira in this particular meeting. And so that's kind of the idea and this overview for this hackathon and like kind of what we're trying to achieve here. So kind of to give you more examples of like, you know, artificial intelligence or AI driven apps, we kind of set up for this hackathon like 4 kind of Kickstarters to say, hey, these are pretty cool, interesting ways of using Vonage in the, you know, using the video and the audio and the text recognition and tying it together with Symbol's APIs for extracting that conversation and doing something with it. So it's something that's actionable. And so the 4 kind of categories that we have laid out here, the first one's kind of like automation and productivity. Like as an example, that would be a personal digital assistant. So if you were to have a long running thing on your laptop and you were, just like I said before, if I mentioned something like, hey, Jira ticket 321 or whatever, it would be very cool to have like a personal digital assistant be able to take and listen to that and have that be actionable on, to maybe update the Jira or whatnot. Another example would be like context awareness. So like another very cool, interesting idea for an application could be filtering profanity, or maybe doing understanding the conversation, that this conversation might be flagged as like hate speech. Basically identify different speeches, different conversations, and identify the speech so that it could either be like, hey, this is like really harmful, or this potentially could be a bad thing, or maybe the opposite, where it's like, hey, this is really good. Maybe we might flag to the person who's talking, right, to say, hey, this is something that we can maybe address or like dive into a little bit more. So another interesting example for an application would be intent detection. So as an example, if we are in a meeting like we are today, and if there's a number of us talking about a particular idea and there's agreement or consensus around this idea, saying, hey, I think we have, an idea, and I think there's a lot of people behind this idea, but it would be very interesting to have the conversation extraction or the conversational awareness automatically take that idea and like flag it and set it aside in some like form of, whether it's meeting notes or, like an idea that's, gets placed in chat, just to say, hey, this is something that kind of everyone agrees on. And, like this might be something we need to revisit. And likewise, if there are unresolved issues, it'd be very interesting to like flag those concepts as well and display them in similar fashions. And then the last idea is to have like a call or conversation coach. So as I'm giving this presentation here, like as the idea for like a speech coach, you might have, me talking, and you have a speech coach running in the background in this video chat, and it identifies the or the ahs or the pauses that I have, and maybe have a little indicator to say how many times I've done that in this presentation, such that it, gives me feedback and helps me improve my conversation while I'm giving webinars and giving meetings and having Zoom calls or video voice chats with Vonage. So these are 4 very interesting ideas for like applications. And one isn't listed, but we'll kind of get to it when we start to go over like the details of the hackathon in the next slide here. So the submission criteria for the hackathon. So there are 2 huge, very important requirements. The first one is you must use Vonage's voice and or video APIs. And then the second one is you must use Symbol's conversation intelligence APIs together within the same application. Kind of the reason why I had laid out those 4 examples for like what kind of like a hackathon submission could be interesting for as a submission for this hackathon was outlined right here. So it's basically 4 really interesting ones would be the automation productivity, the content moderation, the intent detection, and the calling conversation coaching. And there's the last one, which I'm calling the dream big category, which is you can choose to ignore those 4 things and come up with something very innovative, something that we haven't thought of. Like Peter was saying in the intro for the hackathon here, those kind of big ideas could lead to and lend itself towards maybe a whole new startup, or maybe a whole like, domain of conversation processing and video chat and that stuff. So the last one is like completely ignore our 4 recommendations and go for it. Like find something interesting and very cool. So now we've kind of like outlines what we're looking for. Let's talk about like what we're really interested in, which is the cash prize stuff for all the participants. So first prize, so assuming you meet those criteria and you wow us with a cool idea or a cool application, first prize is 1,500 in cash plus a $500 Amazon gift card, which is, if you're like me, I'm on Amazon a lot. That is basically like cash for me too. So in total, it's about like $2,000 spendable cash. And the first place will also include a Symbol Developer Swag Pack, a Vonage Swag Pack, and then also 10,000 free minutes on Symbol's platform. So second prize is $750 in cash, plus $250 in an Amazon gift card, plus the Symbol Developer Swag Pack and the Vonage Swag Pack. And then also 5,000 free minutes on Symbol, the Symbol platform. Now, we have a bonus award, which is very cool. If a project wins first or second place, those two people or those two participants, whether it's a team or an individual, also have the ability to win this bonus award. So you could either win it separately on its own, like you didn't win first or second, and you can win this on its own, or you could be a first or second place winner and also get this bonus award. And it's $500 in cash. And what the bonus is if you can have your project process something in a multimodal conversation like use case, you can win this extra $500 in cash. And what I mean by multimodal is that you can process 2 different data streams from 2 different sources. So as an example, like one maybe like using over telephone, and you're processing that information and you're somehow tying that into like a video voice call, and you're processing the voice from that conversation. So that's the criteria to win this extra bonus award here. So yeah, just to kind of like bring it all back together. So like why this hackathon? Why Vontage? Why Symbol? And I think there's a great synergy here, and it's basically Vontage has a communication platform as a service, which does everything from messaging, video, voice. It very easily, their platform allows you, and their SDKs and all their stuff allow you to quickly enable you to build this stuff. I tried it myself. It's actually quite cool. It's very interesting. You know, I'm a newcomer to, you know, the Vonage SDK and APIs. I thought it was pretty awesome, if you ask me. And so now that you have this ability to have a platform for your voice and your video, and you know, whether it's on telephone or like as a video chat call, you need to be able to process the conversation that's happening within that voice call or within that video call or within that in messages or email or whatnot. And so Symbol's a platform that allow you to do that. It'll allow you to extract the conversation and then intelligently do stuff with that conversation. So mine the conversation and put those dots close enough together between this particular part of the conversation, or maybe another conversation entirely, and be able to put those 2 things close enough together to like build awareness around the conversation. So now that we've talked about what we want to build and like what we're looking for, now you need to be able to submit this. And so this is like how the rules are for the hackathon submission here. So your project must be in the form of a public GitHub repo so that others can take a look at, including the judges. But more importantly, so that other people can take a look at and see like what kind of art and what kind of code that you're doing, what your project's all about. So your README should also contain instructions about how do you, as a person who's just landing on your GitHub repo, how do I use your particular project? And you might want to include things like, hey, like what inspired you to have this idea? And like, why do you think this project that you're building is awesome? And I think a very good differentiator, if you want to really stand out, would be to have a YouTube video embedded in your README to basically talk about your project. Maybe go through its setup, to cover all the things like why you think this is a great idea, what inspired you to build it. But having a YouTube video might be a very, very good differentiator into like having a judge pick out this particular project as a first or second place winner. So all entries must be received by Monday, October 10th by midnight Pacific. We have some social hashtags that you can use just to like let us know like what you're doing with your project, maybe even give status updates. And when you finally are ready to submit your project, there's going to be a submit your project link on the main Voice 2022 hackathon page there. I'm not sure if it's there yet, probably not because we're just kicking off, but yeah, so that should be there for you to submit everything you need to for judging. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about Fontage and the stuff that is being prepared for this.
Okay, so let me share my screen real quick. There we go. So hopefully that should pop up. Yeah, so like I said, my name is Chris Tankersley. I'm a developer advocate at Vonage. So what is Vonage? Depending on how old you are, you may know us all the way back in the 2000s as a VoIP company making very, very funny commercials. But today we primarily deal with communications and communications API. So we do have some customer center stuff and things like that, but for the most part, we deal with APIs. So we make it really easy to be able to add any sort of messaging like SMS or over-the-top services like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, WebRTC, all that kind of stuff, as well as voice and video to just about any application, be it a web application, a desktop application, or a mobile application. So we have SDKs in about 6 different languages. So whatever you want to build on the back end to control all that, we can facilitate that, as well as SDKs for iOS and Android, as well as a web client for both our messaging and our video stuff. We do also have a Flutter wrapper for our Android and iOS, if you're interested in using that as well. But the big thing we bring to the table is also worldwide connectivity. So we service about 190 countries around the world, and we have direct connections to the telcos that you deal with to send those messages. So in a lot of cases, when you're using an SMS provider or a voice provider, they're sometimes going through some intermediary, even potentially us. For us, when you make a connection, we pick the correct telco, go directly to those. So we handle a lot of that. We're also very familiar with country-specific regulations and things like that. For example, in the US, we help you handle the 10 DLC SMS regulations, which help cut down on spam. We also help you register numbers in various countries like France and Germany. To get telephone numbers, a lot of times you have to go through a registration process. So we help deal with a lot of that because we're familiar with a lot of that. We offer basically 2 levels of APIs. One are kind of like the very low level APIs or kind of like building block APIs, as well as some more over the top services. So low level wise, we let you directly send SMS, WhatsApp messages, things like that. What I'll be showing you today is programmatic voice. So you can directly deal with taking an incoming call, making telephone calls, things like that. In-app messaging and voice are for the client side, either web or mobile, but being able to facilitate both the video, the voice, and the actual messaging for that. And then, like I said, web and mobile video. So if you want to build meeting rooms, something like Zoom, something like Google Meet, we facilitate all of those things from individual one-on-one conversations to, I think depending on the setup, you can go up to like 3,000 participants or something like that. As well as some over-the-top services if you want to cut down on the amount of code you need to maintain. So we have Dispatch, which is messaging failover. So if you can't get a hold of a customer one way, we can fall back to another message, like go from SMS to WhatsApp. 2-factor authentication if you don't want to build that in. So we handle the contacting the customer, generating the PIN. You just basically say, hey, start this verification, and then check the PIN, see if it's all good. We have a meetings API if you just want to build instant meeting rooms without having to build everything all out, as well as number insights, which allows you to get information about telephone numbers, as well as some fraud information, which is really important, especially setting up like new customers and things like that. We do have AI Studio, which is our low-code, no-code solution. So if you want to be able to handle things like IVRs or messaging workflows, you can do that all through a drag-and-drop interface through the Vonage dashboard through AI Studio. Today, though, just for a very basic demo, we're going to deal just with voice because this works really well plugging into Symbol AI. But you can start off with the voice and then move to any of the other messaging platforms or any of those other over-the-top services pretty quickly. So while I don't intend you to follow along with this very quick demo, feel free to reference this later. But what you will need is a developer account at developer.vonage.com. You can use that QR code up in the corner and go up to sign up for free. If you do sign up, make sure you use the coupon code on the screen. That will get you an additional 10 euros of credit. All of our billing is currently in euros, which is an important distinction with the current conversion rates. But that being said, you actually get quite a bit of time and messaging out of that. For example, in the US, an SMS costs about half a penny right now. So even at 10 euros, that's thousands of messages you can send. For the demo application, which we have as a GitHub repo, and I'll post in the chat, you can check that out. All you need is Node.js, some sort of tunneling program. I'm going to be using ngrok, but you can also use something like Local Tunnel, and then a browser if you want to see the full system working. So let's pop over to the demo. Find the right window. Here we go. So like I said, we have a GitHub repo. You could just go to github.com, go to Vonage community, and I think we're pretty near the top right now, the Vonage symbol hackathon demo. This is a very small JavaScript application, basically handles being able to take a phone call, connect to a WebSocket so that we can deal with that audio, and then also connect a second telephone so that you can actually do kind of like an agent setup. So let me bring up the code itself. All of this information for setup is in the README, but it's pretty easy. First thing we're going to do is we're going to start ngrok. So we're going to start ngrok. This application listens on port 3000 unless you change it. So we tell ngrok, hey, start an HTTP tunnel on port 3000. I have a subdomain to make things easier for me. If you don't, it'll just give you a random subdomain. But when we start that, it's going to give us a forwarding address. Make that a little bigger. Down here, this HTTP address, we're going to need this in a second. The next thing we'll want to do is create an environment file. So copy the m.dist to .env. And we're going to want this domain portion. You can leave off the HTTPS part. That part is going to be automatically set up in the application itself. But we're going to need this so that way it knows how to connect to the WebSocket outside from our servers back to us. The next thing we're going to want to do is search and purchase a telephone number. There's a couple ways you can go about this. You can do this fully through our dashboard once you're signed in. We do have a Visual Studio Code plugin as well that can handle all this. I'm going to do it from the command line. So we've got a couple commands you can run in our README. So I'm just going to search the US for a toll-free landline with SMS and voice. That gives us a couple different capabilities. So it's going to take a second as it goes through, and it's going to pull up an 833 number here in just a second. Doesn't really matter what I want, so I'm just going to grab this one at the bottom. And in our config file, this is going to be our from telephone number. So we're going to want to save that off to our M file. And I'm going to paste that down in there. And then we're going to want to buy that telephone number. So we just say we want to buy that, and that'll associate it with our account. And there we go. The next thing we'll need to do is actually create an application in Vonage, especially with the voice, as well as like WhatsApp and like our WebRTC stuff. They're all encapsulated in what are called Vonage applications. These are sets of configuration for specific applications and telephone numbers. So we're going to create one of those real quick. We can do that through the command line as well. So I will grab that command. And the application name doesn't really matter, but for right now, I'm just going to call it Vonage symbol demo. And then it's going to want two things. What URL to call when a telephone number calls in, and then where to send any weird events that come up, just kind of like so you can see what's happening. So we're going to use our ngrok URL. So in my case, it's going to be https dragonmantake.ngrok.io, and then webhooks answer. For you'll just need to change the domain part. It'll always be webhooks answer as defined by the application. And then for the events, it's going to be pretty similar. So we'll throw in our, we'll do webhooks events. So what this will do is this will create an application. It'll go ahead and set up all those URLs and everything for us in the background. The most important thing it's going to do is it's going to create an SSL key for us, as well as a configuration file. So all of our applications use public-private key authentication. So this will generate that file for us, as well as get us our configuration, which our application will use. So we can go to the M file, and we're just going to say it's Vonage app.json. We'll pull all of the Vonage information out of that JSON file. And then we're going to want to link our telephone number to our application. So we can use the CLI again and get rid of that pop-up there. We're going to link our telephone number to our application ID. And there we go. So now that number is attached to our application. Anytime someone calls that 833 number, it should get forwarded automatically to our application. The application itself is pretty simple. There's a whole bunch of boilerplate at the top, just because there's two sides to this. But basically, we're going to read in the config file. We're going to pull out that tunnel domain so we know where URLs are at. We do pre-configure a Vonage SDK for you, though technically we're not really using the SDK, but this is all set up for you to use if you want for the voice SDK. The heart of this is in the answer callback. So we need to return a 200 status whenever a telephone number calls in. But then what we'll do is we will return a list of actions for the system to take. These are called NCCOs. So telephone call comes in, gets routed to our application. Vonage expects us to return a blob of JSON with actions. So we're going to have an action just as talk, and it'll say, please wait while we connect you to an agent. And then we'll do two other things. We're going to call the agent's telephone, which we will set up here. My telephone number will be this 2 number. So this 1419 number. Save that off. We're going to connect to that telephone number. And then we're also going to connect to a WebSocket, and that WebSocket will handle taking the actual raw audio that we can do something with later. And the WebSocket's real simple. It basically, if we can't parse the message as JSON, because technically everything in a WebSocket comes back as text, we will throw an error letting us know it's an audio buffer, and then we can send the audio off the symbol. So if I take and run this right now, and I'm going to find my phone, which I set over on the side here, and we'll pull up Visor. So this is my Pixel, which is the number we will call. So I have my phone here itself. Let me unlock it, and we will call our 8333 number. 429-6647. And if I do this correctly, and I put this on speaker. Please wait while we connect you to an agent. And we can kind of see things happening down here on the bottom. I get a telephone call on my Pixel. I'm going to decline it just for right now. But that connects 2 telephone numbers together and connects us to the WebSocket. Now from here, we can actually go to a symbol fairly easily. I'm just going to stop that server real quick. And I'm going to hop over to the branch here. To connect the symbol is actually fairly easy. Symbol provides a JavaScript SDK that you can just throw into any application as well, a front end and a back end one. We're going to use the back end one. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up symbol. They require an application ID and secret. I'm going to drag this over to the side so that way you can't see my application ID and secret. There we go. We'll bring that back. So you can't see all of it. Oh, well. Requires an application ID and secret and a base path. So we just initialize the symbol SDK itself. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a front end with some WebSocket clients that'll be able to see our transcription in real time. So we're going to keep track of all those front end UI clients, as well as a meeting ID for this specific call, as well, and the connection that we're going to make to symbol. So when a telephone number calls in addition to setting up the routing, we are also going to make a real-time request to symbol, and we are going to ask for action items and questions. We're just not going to show them off, but we are going to ask for those. We're going to generate a meeting ID. One thing to keep in mind is the sample rate when configuring this. This needs to match our sample rate. So here I've got 16,000 because in our WebSocket, we're also going to send 16,000. So make sure those are the same. Otherwise, the audio will be very unintelligible just because of the way audio works. The Symbol AI has a couple different handlers you can deal with. So like you can see speech detection in real time using the on speech detected method. We're only going to worry about the on message response, which is basically it's finished transcribing something in pretty quick, very quickly, and it'll send like full sentences instead of chunks of a sentence. And we're just going to send those back to the WebSocket clients. And then the handle for the WebSocket is actually pretty easy. We're just going to keep track of our UI people as they come in. They'll send a Web UI Connect. And if it's an audio frame, we'll catch that error saying it's not JSON. And then we will use our connection we created and send the audio message back up to Symbol. So if this all works correctly, I should be able to go to, whoops, let me start my app. That will help. We should get a homepage through there, so we'll get real-time transcription. I will find my phone again and I'll bring up Visor. So if we do this properly, go back to recents. We're going to recall that number. Oh, but sometimes we get into a weird little issue where I don't respond quick enough locally connecting to Symbol.
Please wait while we connect you to an agent.
So this time I'll let the call go through. So it's dialing my Pixel, and this time I'll accept it. So now we have a conversation between two telephone numbers, and we are transcribing it in real time. There we go. So basically by forwarding that audio frame onto Symbol, we can get that transcription. Is it going to give me the second part of the sentence? It's probably not. But we can forward the audio frames on to Symbol. It can do all of its detection in real time, and we can handle it from there. How much of that will it grab? Okay, I'm probably talking. It doesn't help I'm on speakerphone. But that gives you a basic overview of how it all works. So I'll hang up there. This repository is public. Anybody can go and download it and play with it. It's a good jumping off point, whether you want to start with just Vonage and figure out how to wire yourself into Symbol itself, or start off with a partial connected application and then go from there. And I think, yep, I will pass it back over to David.
Cool. Awesome. That was a great demo. Really cool to see like everything kind of integrated. Cool. Let me share my screen again. Alrighty. So I thought now that we've kind of gone over the platform portion of the challenge here, the hackathon, I think we should focus on taking a look at the Symbol platform and like what capabilities the platform provides. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview. So Symbol is effectively a way to understand like human conversation naturally. So like you might have heard like NLP before, but it's basically understanding speech and conversations, and not just speech, but understanding the context behind the text, the conversation. So the Symbol platform can process everything from video, audio, and text in real time, just like Chris shown in his demo there, or you can even do it asynchronously. So if you had recorded conversation in the form of like an MP3, you can post that entire MP3 file to the platform and then have Symbol work its magic, extracting important details of the conversation. So just like I said, that it's nice that there's Symbol provides easy consume APIs and SDKs. In this particular demo, it was all in JavaScript. So it's all in Node.js. So there's APIs for both platforms, and it's fairly easy to use and to consume. And just kind of like the high level of what Symbol is, it's basically a software as a service platform for extracting and understanding context within conversation. So on the back end side of things, there's a conversation AI that's working its magic. It's completely domain agnostic, so it can be applied to anything, whether it's call centers, or even like, Zoom calls with your mom talking about recipes. There is no limit to it. And there's no, because it is software as a service, there are no like machine learning models that you need to like train. Everything's provided up front. You just really just need to consume the APIs themselves to get going. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm going to hit on a wide variety of functionality that the platform provides. The first one is like if you want to do like conversation insights, there's a number of like action items, message transcriptions, questions. But for action items, if you were to post a conversation using the APIs and you wanted to extract the action items, this would basically, you'd make an API call, and in the returning JSON, you'd get identify like a list of tasks or things to do in the conversation. So as an example, like if you're in a conversation and you say, hey, maybe I need to call Peter later on this evening to talk about like this hackathon. So if you were to post, if that sentence was said in that conversation, it would extract that as an action item to do later on. Another very interesting thing is sentiment analysis. So that allows you to take the conversation on a per sentence basis and even the conversation as a whole, and to extract like what the sentiment or the feeling was behind each statement or the conversation. So as an example, like if you say, they're talking about a particular feature and you have a coworker said like, oh, that's great. It would actually flag that as something like as like a negative, right? As he doesn't really mean that. It's more like it's the opposite of what you actually mean. But if you were to say like, hey, I have this new feature, and someone says, oh, that's great, that's wonderful, like that sentiment that would come back from that sentence would be like very positive, right? And so that's what sentiment analysis does for you. And so it's a pretty simple API call to get all of this stuff. So like another API call would be just like what Chris was demoing. There was a message or transcription to just extract the sentences out of this particular conversation. And then a next thing you might want to do is extract topics from a conversation. So if you had an entire conversation and you upload it to the Symbol platform, it can very easily and quickly, without very little input on your end, to extract like meaningful topics, important messages, or important phrases that were contained within this conversation. And it'll extract them for you, return them in a like a JSON format, so you can see all of the topics within a given conversation. And trackers is very similar to topics. Trackers allows you to classify a conversation with given a context, to find similarities and like repeatable things that were said within a given conversation. So as an example, I kind of think of like, for me, I kind of like think of trackers as like, hey, I know that this particular conversation is going to talk about certain topics. And if I provide like those keywords or those phrases into the API, it will be like clued in ahead of time to extract those particular topics or phrases or keywords within a conversation. And it kind of advances them to like, I'm really interested in these things for topics that were said in a conversation. And the last one I kind of hit up on is like post-processing. So the summary, there's a summary API, which allows you to take an entire conversation. I kind of call it the TLDR, which is the TLDR API, which is basically the too little didn't read. So if you have like a long conversation, think like maybe like a podcast that's an hour long plus, you could take this entire conversation, post it to the Symbol API, the platform, and say, extract a summary for me. And it will literally distill down and boil down the entire conversation into like key points that a user should be like aware of in this conversation. So that's kind of like a lot of I hit on a few of them. That's kind of like a lot of what the Symbol platform provides. And so if you're looking to do this hackathon, you definitely need to create an account on the Symbol platform. It's a free account, so you just go to platform.symbol.ai. It's free. Every month you get X number of words and minutes to process each month. They refresh month after month. So you can the account that you create here can definitely be reused for other projects and whatnot. And so once you create your account on the platform, I'm going to talk about these 5 topics here: the documentation, the API Explorer, getting started with Postman, and like how to set up a development environment. And then finally, we're going to actually look at some code and like contained within this getting started samples repo that we have in GitHub. So everyone can still see my screen. So when you open up the docs page, so it's just docs.simul.ai. Hopefully make everything larger, but maybe too large. So when you first land on the docs landing page, the first thing that I kind of really would like to call out, especially if you're not familiar with the platform, is to take a look at this section right here that says getting started. And it actually conveniently breaks down the categories that I want to talk about today. So in this getting started guide, you'll see that you can try out the API Explorer. You can get started with Postman, and this is the section that's going to help you set up your environment, your development environment, if you don't already have one. So if we take a look at the API Explorer, I'm just going to click right into it right here. So when you first log into the Simul platform, you can go click on the left here and click on API Explorer, and you can see all of the different APIs that you can exercise without knowing any code or without knowing even how the platform really works. It's kind of a tutorial to get you started to understand what each of these APIs or these capabilities are offered on the Simul platform. So something very interesting to note is, although you can go to the API Explorer here and you can like start drilling into like, I want to exercise the topics API, you can actually do all of this embedded in the Simul documentation. So there's 2 ways of really doing that. I actually prefer this way, and I'm going to show you why. It's very clean, and it's kind of discrete, so we can like look at each step in the process on how we process a particular conversation on the Simul platform. So just like in that previous page, we have all the different pieces of functionality or the different capabilities the platform provides. I'm going to pick something very easy, which is just topics. So I want to be able to extract all of the topics from a given conversation. So if I click down here in the API Explorer and I select topics, so the first thing you need to do is you need to authenticate with the platform, with the Simul platform. To do that, you're going to have an app ID and an app secret. So when you first log into the system, you're going to, like the very first page that you're going to land on, it's going to give you your app ID and app secret. We probably noticed it before. I didn't call it out, but it's right there on the landing page before you clicked into the API Explorer. But because I'm logged in here, it's going to pre-populate that, so you don't really need to worry about that. So in order to authenticate with the system, it's pretty simple. If you can look at the request right here. Oops. It's effectively just doing a very simple OAuth to post command with our app ID and our app secret here. So if you run the request, this is effectively going to log us into the to the platform. And the output of that request is this access token, which basically says, hey, yes, you have successfully authenticated with the system. So if we click next here, expand the screen a little bit. So the next thing we need to do in this exercise for like finding the topics within a given conversation is we need to like provide the conversation or process the conversation. And so that this step here allows us to have pre-curated like content for us to upload and try. So one of them is a customer support call, another one's like a new segment audio file, and another one's a speech or presentation audio file. You can, if you want to, you can upload your own file, or you can provide like a URL to like maybe like an S3 bucket that already has an MP3 file sitting there, and you can just provide that publicly accessible URL to process a conversation. For this example, I'm just going to pick the default, the customer support call. And if we run the request here, this curl command basically takes the basically posts this audio file. You can actually see where this URL is sitting. It's actually on Amazon in an S3 bucket. It's called newphonecall.mp3. And it's effectively, by running this request, we're going to post this audio file to the Symbol platform. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that's done, and we're going to go to the next step. So one very important critical part that you need to do is, because it takes time to process the conversation, especially maybe if this conversation, the audio file is like 2 hours in length, you're going to need to check to see if the job is complete, right? See if the Symbol platform has actually ingested all of that audio content and extracted all of the intelligence out of the conversation. I just hit run request right now. I was hoping to catch it so that it was still in progress, but it looks like it's finished already. And you can see it right here in the resulting JSON that it's completed, which means that we can move on to the next step, which is grab me the intelligence, or grab me the context or the topics in this particular case contained within this audio file. And so here we're at generate the intelligence, which is kind of cut off a little bit because of the screen size here. We're still authenticated. There's our token. There's a conversation ID that we got in the previous step when we first uploaded the audio file. And this would be the curl command to get the topics for that given conversation. So this is the conversation ID. We're posting, or we're doing a get from topics. And so if you just run this curl command against this conversation ID, it'll report all of the topics that were contained within this conversation. And so if you look down, we grabbed it and it's all presented in JSON. So you can see a collection of topics here. So it's some topics, because this is like a service or support, like tech support kind of call. So you can see some of the topics that were discussed in this conversation. So like service provider, service technician, right? So these are like the things that the Symbol platform extracted from this conversation as topics contained within this conversation. So cool. So I would definitely encourage everyone to take a look at the API Explorer, especially if you're unfamiliar with all of the capabilities, but you can basically run this same similar style against each one of the capabilities here. So if you're like looking at questions, you can go through the same workflow that I just did to like extract all the questions out of conversation. Or if you wanted to do follow-ups, you could do that as well. So the next thing, if we go back to the documentation, if you wanted to see something a little bit more less less of a demo and more of a little bit more hands-on, where you're getting involved with the nitty-gritty details about how the platform works, I definitely would encourage you to get started with Postman. So that's this next tab below. It goes through and helps you set up your Postman environment, how you can clone the Symbol workspace, and how you can get started using Postman, so you can actually see the API calls that are being made in order to generate all the intelligence that's being collected from a conversation. So I'm actually going to go through an example of that really quickly. So here's my Postman workspace. I've already gone through, obviously, the documentation. I've cloned my workspace. So this is, if I look at the different workspaces I have, this is the official Symbol workspace. I've cloned it into my own. And then I've also set up my own environment. So if I look at, so my environment's called Symbol API. And if I look at my environments, my environment variables, I've already pre-populated that app ID and that app secret that were used to log into the system. And we're going to use that same app ID and app secret to log into the platform, but using Postman here. So if we come back here, just like in the API Explorer, the first step was to authenticate with the system. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. And you can go down and expand the authentication folder and go to generate token. I'm gonna have to move this down a little bit. And if you go to the, you actually look at the API call that we're about to make here, it's the OAuth 2, right? Because we're going to take the app ID and the app secret, and we're going to post it to this URL in order to get our authentication token. So I need to make a slight change here, because we want to populate this from our environment variables that I had preset. And so now so this is what the the body of the request looks like that we're going to post to the Symbol platform. And if we hit send here, I might have to move this up a little bit. The resulting JSON right here lets you know that you've logged into the system by giving you an access token with like the duration of how much time is left on it. Like this, it expires in that many seconds. So now that we've authenticated with this system, the really cool thing about Postman is it's going to take this access token because it's kind of like, we've curated this this Symbol repo so that it's going to take that access token and allow us to carry it forward in the next steps of the process. So just like we did before in the API Explorer, the next thing we need to do if we're doing like an async type of API call, which is provide an MP3 to be processed. So we're going to do that here in Postman. So we're going to go to the async APIs, and we're going to go to the post audio URL. And if you can, and we're going to click that. And so like we're going to post an MP3 file to the Symbol platform, effectively upload it to the platform for processing. As you can see here, we have the curly brackets for the API token, which is preset, which I received the API token or that access token in the previous login step, and it's going to pre-fill it out for us here in this step. The body is kind of not really interesting other than the fact that if we're going to do an upload to the platform, to the Symbol platform, using an audio URL, this is the audio URL that we're going to provide the platform. So if we hit send here, you can see that conversation ID and that job ID, which means we successfully uploaded this file to the Symbol platform. And just like in the API Explorer, the next thing we need to do is we need to check the job status to see if the platform is done processing this API call. So the job ID is going to get pre-populated from that previous step. So if we hit send here, it looks like it's already completed. So I guess it's a smaller audio file. And so we've taken that job ID and that conversation ID from that previous step, and it's getting pre-populated here in this get API call, right? Job, or getting the status of the job effectively. So now the last step, just like in the API Explorer, was to obtain whatever context we were interested about the conversation. And in the API Explorer case, we are interested in the topics within that conversation. So we're going to do the same thing here just to keep it like completely like one-to-one. So if we go down to the conversation API folder here on the left, and we go down to topics, so we'll do a get topics. You can see that the get call here with the URI or the URL that we're going to call in, from the Symbol platform. You can see that the conversation ID is pre-populated from the previous step, and the API token is still there, right? Because we need to basically, really make sure we're authenticated with the system. And so if we do a get and on conversations with this conversation ID / topics, we should get all the topics for this given conversation. If we do that, you can see just like previously, so it's a different MP3 file or different conversation that was taken, but you can see all the topics here. The first one is bankers. The second one is something says separate systems. Another one is beautiful chairs and cabinets. So chest doll houses. So very interesting topics. I actually haven't listened to that particular sample file before, but it basically, just like before, using Postman here, we can actually see all the API calls at a more technical level, and then see all the output derived from this, in this case, topics for this conversation. So the last thing I wanted to touch on was the setting up your environment. If you aren't familiar with Node.js or some of the other platforms that we support, you can go to set up your environment here on the left, and then you can go down and it will give you a cool way, give you instructions to set up your environment for like just using curl or Node.js or Python. And there's even a cool way to exercise some code. If you don't want to have those things set up on your local environment, you can use something called Replit to have it like execute some code in the cloud. But for this hackathon, you're pretty much very much going to have this stuff running locally on your laptop. So you're going to want to like definitely take a look at these, like getting started, like how to install and set up Node.js if you're not familiar with it. And so now that we've kind of walked through, like, you know, gone through the API Explorer, got an understanding what each of the API calls are about, and using Postman to kind of see how we exercise these API calls, to now setting up your environment to actually run some code locally. The next thing I want to kind of touch on is actually running some code, and it's in that getting started samples repo here. And in this repo, there's actually a README here which goes through and shows all of the different capabilities or all the example code that exists within this repo. And sure enough, it actually mirrors one-to-one with what capabilities the Symbol platform has to provide. So within this repo, you'll have basically a very simple main application that will go over like action items. So if you like clicked into here, it'll go into the section of the code here where it'll show, you know, this is a main application for extracting action items or follow-ups or doing just simple transcription here for messages. The same thing that we did for topics. So it's a very convenient way to like find example code that you might want to use in your application for the hackathon. And if you scroll all the way down, if you want to find a very convenient way of exercising or calling these API calls, but actually in code, I created in this repo at the very root of it, there's a sample script called runexamples.sh, which allows you to exercise each one of these little main applications to like actually kick off like and call one of these API calls on the Symbol platform. So let me go ahead and show you that really quickly. Let's see if I have it here still. Oops. Hang on. There we go. So if you look at the README, it's got instructions for doing very simple things. Do a git clone, cd into get starting samples, and then you're going to need to do a you need to configure an environment file that's here by default. You're going to take that same Symbol app ID and that same app secret, and you're going to put them into this file, and then you're going to copy it into a .env, which I already have set up prior to this. So, oops. So which I have already set up prior to this right here. So this .env file. So if we take a look at the README, you can go through it and you can see how this run example script actually works, or you can just execute it yourself. It'll go over effectively, if you provide it with no parameters, this is effectively like the help, like how do I use this utility? But if you go through and you read it and you want to exercise something like in the async API section, you can go run examples.sh async, and it will list out all of the example applications contained within this repo. So as an example, if we wanted to run the async API for topics, so we want to extract all of the topics, but in code using the Symbol platform, you can just go run examples.sh, go to async, and then type topics, because here's a list of all the APIs that are available under async, and topics is available. And we're just going to go ahead and run that. And at the root of the repo, there's a like a default MP3 file, which is just used in case you don't have an MP3 file or an audio source for a conversation available to process. It's just a really simple way that you can see the API call in progress and working without actually having an audio source available. So if you do the run examples.sh for async and topics, this is running the topics API call against this audio file called new phone call.mp3. From that, you're going to get the conversation ID and the job ID. This is the same output that you get from when you are in step 2 and you upload the file to the Symbol platform. Behind the scenes, we're making that step 3, which is calling to make sure that the conversation is ready. It's sitting there polling to see if it is. And then when it's done, it's doing that final step, which is extract the conversation for all the topics that are there. And so in this case, in the new phone call.mp3, we're extracting topics, and it just so happens that the default MP3 file, the conversations that is at the root of this repo, is that service call that we used in API Explorer. So you can see that you have service provider, service technician, appointment, and whatnot. So this is a very easy way to see in code, like how you can call or like make calls for like async topics or for any other kind of call that we might have. So like topics, sentiment, summaries, and all that. So just to give you a little bit more of a demo here, if you don't want to use the default file, you can use any file name you want. I've just picked a song, so you can go use Alanis Morissette's All I Really Want, and you can run that. It'll override the default MP3 file. So it's a very easy way also to kind of verify, like, hey, if you're listening or have a particular conversation, you can just run it through this run examples.sh, and it can extract all the topics for this conversation, which is actually just a song. So I'm going to cancel out of that and going to show you one last thing. So here, if we do a run examples.sh, we can actually, and passing in the async parameters, here are all the like async, like the asynchronous API calls that we have available. But if you want to actually take a look at all the streaming examples that we have, so if you go run examples.sh streaming, there's 4 examples for doing streaming or real-time processing on the Symbol platform. It's actually identical to exactly what Chris had just run in his demo. So you can do message transcription, you can get questions and topics. This is just a very pared down way, like a simple main application. So if you just want to do that within, like for testing purposes, or to understand how the API call is made, this is a great way to take a look at that. So if we go streaming, and we'll just do topics. So I'm going to run the topics streaming or real-time example for extracting topics in a conversation. And when I hit this, it's actually going to hook up into my microphone, kind of similar to what Chris did, but using an actual phone. But we're just going to use my microphone to extract like the conversation to process topics. So if I run that there, it's initializing the SDK. And now we're extracting all of the topics. It's listening to what I'm saying because I'm talking into my microphone. And you can see that it's all updating on the screen there. So that's kind of like all I wanted to show in terms of where you can find these code samples. I want to just kind of like drill down to where these things are being called in the GitHub repo. So if you called the, so like in the example, we did the async topics. If you actually click into the topics, so on the README page here in the repo for the getting started samples, if you click down and you went into topics, it takes you to another README that says, hey, you're using, this is the topics API. This is like an example for it. And then you actually click the index.js. It is just a very simple main application that demonstrates how to grab topics using the async API. And they're all basically broken down by folder, by capability. And if you wanted to go to see these streaming examples, you can see them right there. So yeah, that's kind of all I had for my demo. Should be a very good start for everyone to get started with, with the Symbol and the platform and all the capabilities that we have. And let me come back to the slides here. So here's the demo. Just wanted to talk about the various resources, both on the Vonage and the Symbol side. We have links, obviously right here. We'll definitely make the slide deck available for everyone after this this kickoff meeting. And definitely always, as always, if you want real-time help, come and tweet at us, take a look at the GitHub page, join us in Slack, message us if you have any questions or have any concerns about how to use the APIs.